This is a lesson that was requested. I love it when the kids come up to me and say, "Will you do a lesson on?" Yesterday, Sarah came up to me and she said, "Papa, would you do a lesson on kitty cats?" And I said, "I can't. Alita's not here. She's broke her ankle. She's not going to be with us tomorrow. And I just can't do a lesson on kitty cats without the cat lady." And so that one has been postponed. But I had kind of been going in a different direction throughout the week's study. But she goes, "Well, what about lizards?" And you know that I have described lizards as snakes with feet. And for the most part, I'm not real fond of lizards, especially those that people keep in a house or an apartment. And you open the door, and there's nothing that smells worse than a lizard's den. It has a smell that not even a pig pen can be described as smelling like a lizard's den. But then she says, "No, no, no, Papa, you don't understand. I want a little lizard." And so I realized that what she was talking about was something that I understand a little bit more about. Now, the two on top are brightly colored lizards for aesthetics. But this one right here, we might find him wandering around in our woods. And so while I don't necessarily rush to pick those ones up, when I was a wee little fellow about Silas's size, I used to chase. And I don't know why we had so many of them before we had cats. We had a dog that killed all the cats, and so we didn't have any cats when I was Silas's age. But we had fence lizards. We had them everywhere. My dad had a stack of poplar lumber, and they were all through that poplar lumber. And I realize now that I've studied lizards a little bit more, why. As a child, I didn't know, but there were grubs that were eating away on the rotten ends of those boards, and fence lizards love grubs. So I told Sarah, I said, we can study about one of God's amazing created creatures. Let's look with me, as we usually do, at Romans chapter 1. Before we begin a created creatures lessons, to remind us about why we are studying God's creation. And we need to study God's creation in accordance with His Word. But the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1 and in verse 20 says, "For his invisible attributes," God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they, mankind, are without excuse. Paul says that we understand some things about God by the things that He has created. And Sarah was absolutely positive that there was a lesson in lizards. So if we were to search our woods in southeastern Ohio, we could find 5 or 6 different types of lizards. Now, this one right here is a fence lizard. That's what I used to chase after. And they're really, really interesting little creatures, even though they might look like snakes with legs. But that was my childhood favorite, was the fence lizard. And I used to catch them, and I used to run my hand across them and feel their scales. And I don't know what happened to that little guy that thought that lizards were cute. But there's also 5-lined, and oops, we've got a typo. It's not kinks, it's skinks. I used to call them, what did I call them? I'm trying to remember. Stinks. I used to call them stinks because I couldn't say skinks. And I told Kate, I said, I'm so afraid when I look at the word skink, all I see is sink. So I don't know what's wrong with my eyes, but that's what I see. I said, I'm afraid I'm going to look at the screen this morning and I'm either going to say stinks or sinks and not skinks. But there's the ones, there was one on the front cover picture that was a 5-line skink. There's broad-headed skinks, and there are little brown skinks in southeast Ohio. Cousins of each other, closely related, and we're going to look at one of the God-given characteristics of those skinks that no other lizard actually has around here. And believe it or not, we might even find a Mediterranean house gecko. I thought it was interesting. These have come in on plants. Not the lizards themselves, but they have laid their eggs in potted plants that have been imported from the Mediterranean region, and their eggs hatch, and now we have Mediterranean ginkgos wandering around America. We are truly a nation of imported products. And lastly, and you probably won't find them on this side of Ohio yet, but lastly, the European wall lizards are making their way here eastward from Cincinnati. My understanding is they've crossed over into Kentucky and Indiana. So it won't surprise me if one of these days I don't do something and run across one of those big old bug-eyed things. They're not the Geico advertisers. These ones are brown. But and I've yet to pick up the accent. But we're going to look at these things, and